Welcome back to the Zoomer. With the Bank of Canada steadily raising interest rates, a lot of folks with mortgages haven't felt the full impact yet. But as each homeowner's mortgage gets closer to its renewal date, the prospect of a surge in people putting their houses up for sale looms. So how can mortgage holders prepare for higher rates? Let's turn back to the panel for their insights. And that is the trend, Brett. The number of homes being put up for sale rose last month. I think it was for the 5th consecutive month. What does that tell you?
Well, if you have a mortgage that you can't pay for because the interest rates are rising, you probably can't afford the house. And that's just the honest truth of what's going on, which makes it very challenging. And this is a generational divide. If you were able to get into the housing market as it was rising, and if you leveraged yourself a bit too much on that, it's come at the expense now of younger generations that are entering the hottest housing market in the world, essentially, and it makes it very difficult for them to get in. And so the younger generations, they look at rising interest rates as potentially an opportunity to cool that market down and make it even possible, or at least remotely possible, for us to actually afford a home. And so it's a challenging situation.
Yeah.
There is going to be pain felt, but it comes at there's going to be a transition in the market.
And at the expense of Zoomers who own their home, Avi. Zoomers have typically looked at their home as a key part of their retirement savings, and now the prospect of the value of that home going down is very real for them.
It is very real. I think most financial analysts or planners would say it's a mistake to think about your home equity as a retirement plan for exactly the kinds of risks that we're seeing right now. So if you are counting on your home, it is going to be very challenging. And, you know, before we were talking about whether or not there'll be a recession, is that important? The one thing that does scare me is the prospect of huge defaults in property, just like there was in the US in 2008, 2009, that we avoided here in Canada because people are overburdened leverage-wise in terms of debt on houses, on cars, credit card balances are increasing, and everybody's kind of trying to make do, but there's going to come a tipping point, and that's the thing that scares me.
I want to call up a question from one of our audience members, Nicole in Ajax. She's 55, and she had this to say. Go ahead.
With interest rates this high, it's getting tough to keep up with payments. So should we sell or should we hang tight, hoping that interest rates come down soon? What are your thoughts?
Jim, I think a lot of people find themselves in this situation where they're wondering what to do. What say you?
Well, if I had a crystal ball that could answer Nicole's question with any type of certainty at all, Marissa, I wouldn't be on this show. I'd be making $1 billion on the futures markets with clear information about where interest rates are going to go. Eventually, interest rates are going to come down. That could be within a year, or it could take a couple years. So if Nicole and her family can hang on that long, then great. And the banks have been showing a certain amount of flexibility in that. They've allowed people to renegotiate the term of their mortgages. They've also introduced these negative amortization loans, which are strange. It means you're actually borrowing money as you're paying it back. So it's not a long-term solution, but as a short-term buffer to help get through this time, it could be helpful. But ultimately, Brett is right. If you cannot truly afford the interest rates on the house that you've bought, then you're going to have to think about downsizing, and then that will have repercussions on the overall housing market, no doubt about it. Making things even more complicated, high interest rates have a perverse impact on housing supply. We've seen a big downturn in residential construction investment since the Bank of Canada started jacking up rates. So at a time when we all agree there's a housing shortage, we're actually seeing less housing supply, not more. So that will put a bit of a floor under house prices. And I would not expect the sort of free fall in house prices that we saw in previous contractions.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Jim. It's a challenging situation where you would expect that with rising interest rates, there'd be more people, like the question that we just received, who are looking at can they afford the mortgage payments that they currently have on the books. In many cases, they'll say no, they'll sell that home. But that's still not enough supply to accommodate for all the newcomers that we're welcoming to this country and all of the younger people that are looking to get into that market. And until that supply increases, we're not going to solve the housing crisis as it currently stands. And to Jim's point, that's right, the cost of building materials, the cost of labor, that has all been going up as well. And so it's more expensive now than ever to actually build new housing in this country. You're seeing some relief on that in terms of the GST being removed on the construction of rental properties, but we'll have to see a lot more action taken to get housing starts up to actually create some type of balance in the market, and we're far from that. So it's a very challenging situation where we're looking at people that are now having to give up their homes because they can't afford the mortgage rates, but simultaneously, it's still restrictive for new people to get into the market. It's kind of the worst of both worlds.
And then you didn't mention rent. Rent is up 6.5% year over year. What then?
I am so thankful I am not a renter. I don't know. I mean, this is the other way that people are being squeezed, and there is no obvious come down happening. I think the only thing, well, as Brent said, the removal of the HST on residential construction is one of the few things that fiscal policy has been able to do. The other things that people often talk about, which I think are also important, are changes in zoning regulations. In Toronto, for example, there's always talk about getting that medium density building allowed, which we just don't do to preserve our existing neighborhoods.
And I really think this is the real tragedy of it all, in that Canada has become such an expensive place to live, and there are so many people that are now priced out of the market. It's increasingly challenging for people to live near where they work. It's increasingly challenging for people to pay for their groceries on a daily basis. And whether or not we're in a technical recession, it's kind of besides the point. If you anecdotally go around and talk to people, Canada has become so expensive for them to live that many are looking elsewhere. They're looking at different provinces, and in some cases, different countries, or maybe they're reconsidering whether they should be coming to this country because expenses are so high.
Yeah.
And that is a serious problem. It's political, but it's really economic because it's going to make Canada a less competitive place in the world.
All right, hold that thought. On the other side, strategies to minimize inflation on your grocery bill. That's next.